Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 1st of June 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us Northern Exposure, of course, from north of the border.
Well, we're going to start, Brian, with the Salmond Dolan legal case. This is Join the Legal Challenge to the UK government lockdown, doing very well on Crowd Justice crowdfunding website. Well, they're also doing very well because they have managed to get the government to release the minutes of the SAGE meetings. This is part of the first success of this legal action so far. Well, what is it about? Well, they're saying that we believe that the government has acted illegally and disproportionately over the COVID-19 lockdown, and we're taking action by forcing people to stay at home and forcing business to close. They are, we believe, in contravention of basic human rights offered under English law, and that of the right to enjoy your property peacefully and so on, right? So now the government has released the SAGE minutes. Here they are. If you want to search for it, look for Transparency and Freedom of Information releases on the gov.uk website. Well, we haven't had much time to look at these in detail yet. Others have as we'll come on to in a second, done a little bit more analysis of them. But one thing that did jump out at us, and thanks to our researchers who noticed this, the conclusion that the introduction of bubbles is not straightforward. The conclusion is that the introduction of bubbles is not straightforward and carries potential unforeseen risks. SAGE can undertake more work on this, and we would advise understanding this more to inform any decision. Now, that was the minutes of the 7th of May. And as we've been reporting, Brian, the government has continued to pursue this notion of bubbles over the last couple of weeks. Yep. And it looks like they're going to go ahead with that. Now, the question is, are they going ahead with that in spite of SAGE's advice? Because what a number of people, including this blogger here, Paul Chaplin, have pointed out, of course, is that when Boris initiated the lockdown, he did so against SAGE's advice. And we'll bring David Scott in a second, but one of the discussions that David and I have been having since the beginning of this, since the 23rd of March, really was that, of course, Boris was pursuing a particular policy up until that point, and suddenly did a 180-degree U-turn on the policy and decided to impose the lockdown. So Paul goes through a timeline, really beginning with 17 days towards the lockdown, reading through the SAGE minutes, highlighting the key points. And at the end of the process, he comes up with a number of questions. And he's asking at the end, in the 3 days leading up to the lockdown on the 23rd, so that's between the 19th and the 22nd of March 2020, he wants to know who was making the decisions about Britain's future. Where are those decisions minuted? What non-SAGE scientific advice was provided? Or was there no scientific advice at all? And he is suggesting here that answers itself, because if you look at the timeline, and I strongly recommend people to go and do look at this, it's pretty clear that the final decision wasn't based on the scientific advice at all. And why was the SAGE advice not to lock down ignored? David, let's bring you onto the programme at this point. This is a massive success for Salmond Dolan and the legal case to get these minutes released, because initially SAGE were refusing to do so. They've been released, and it's just as bad as we suspected, actually.
It is, and it is a huge victory, because so much is completely opaque these days. We don't know really who's governing us. We don't know what they believe. We don't know what motivates them. And we don't know what the decisions are, because it's so often unminuted or behind closed doors or in secret. We're governed in secret. So to get some insight into this is tremendously valuable.
But I think we have to add and recognise, David, that this has had to be forced out of the government. The whole country shut down, the destruction quite unbelievable. Tens of thousands of people have died unnecessarily due to lockdown, but the public and somebody who's got money has had to force the government to actually become transparent. This is the real issue. We've got a secretive government of occupation operating. It's secret.
Absolutely. Just say, of course, he only has the money because of the generosity of many, many people, because lots and lots of people. And if anybody wants to take something positive out of this, the response that he's had to his crowdfunding demonstrates that there are a lot of people in this country that agree that this lockdown was disproportionate, and they've put their hands in their pockets to help bring that out
and challenge it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the meantime, then today, of course, 1st of June, many schools reopening. Some schools not actually having pupils back today. Some schools having pupils back next week because they're still preparing for that situation. And the question on many people's minds is it safe? We would argue that it is, but as a result of a lot of the propaganda through the mainstream press and so on, lots of people still very concerned about it. So this organisation, the NFER, they call themselves the leading independent provider of education research and insights. They've done a survey on this, and they're saying that about 50% of parents are planning to keep their children away from home when the schools open today, and they're saying, really that this is as a result of some people not really quite getting to grips with what is correct with respect to this, and who can blame them, because they've been bombarded with so much bad information through the mainstream press. And David, both you and I have family members that are in the education sector. It seems that the schools have been sort of forced to reopen by the government. They don't really know how they're going to fulfill the requirements that the government is setting on them to socially distance with 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old children. The whole thing is nonsense, aside from the fact that parents are being encouraged to believe that it's dangerous to send their children to school in the first place.
Well, nonsense on a good day, because a lot of the social distancing measures that we're now seeming to be imposing on children are potentially psychologically very harmful. What happens if you take an entire generation and tell them that coming into contact with another human being could kill them? What does that do? We've never tried that before.
I think that's...
Well, the silence says it all, David,
Yes.
because it is immensely difficult, immensely dangerous. We got some comments a bit later from a journalist who's written an article for The Telegraph, but in her article, it's clear that she doesn't understand everything that's taken place. And there's a lot that's happened, and we don't know what the effects are going to be longer term.
But David, even when people do go out of their way to try to fulfill the obligations that the government is attempting to impose on them, to socially distance and so on, it doesn't always work out. So here's a quick story from Scotland on the Venus Gym.
Yes, the Venus Gyms in Johnson and Renfrewshire, and Andrea and John Porter, who own and run the gym, were doing everything possible to keep trading in very modified ways, and to the benefit of some people, some disabled people, for example, who were using the gym as their only form of exercise. And then they were shut down by the authorities. We'll look at this more in extra time, but with a short clip just now, as I discussed with them over the weekend what had happened and what they thought needs to be done.
Okay, let's have a look at that.
And the thing is, unless people get some kind of sense of this isn't a particularly fearful disease, you shouldn't be terrified to meet other human beings, and you should get on with your life. We're probably going to go under if people don't come back to gyms.
Yeah.
And what would you say to the political leaders that have created all of this? What message would you give them now from what you can see on the ground?
Well, I would say stop trying to save face. Admit that some of the information you've been given wasn't quite right, and then reassess the evidence that's there and make proper, intelligent decisions. That's what I would ask them to.
So, David, very, very astute comments there, but you were mentioning the fact that disabled people are relying on this. I know just a bit of anecdotal information here. A couple of people that rely on these types of facilities, or physiotherapists and so on, just to continue existing, and they're really struggling at this point in time. This is one of the effects of lockdown, which is really pretty. It's hidden. It's not something that the mainstream press are discussing, and of course, it's making people's lives very, very difficult. In fact, hellish, I would say. And one of the aspects that at the more extreme end is resulting with people not seeking proper medical assistance and then ending up dying.
Yes, and the response from the authorities was the response of, we must follow the rules. So what you're expressing there, what Andrea and John Porter were expressing, was a reasoned response which has care and consideration for individual human beings. And that was verboten. That was not allowed. We must follow the rules. The rules are absolute. The rules are inflexible. The rules are not like laws, because laws always have a context of higher law and reasonable tests and things which can override a law if there's something more pressing, which is part of the judgment and require judgment. Rules don't require judgment. Rules just require obedience. And this is the problem we're having.
Indeed. Sorry, did you want to comment?
Well, I just wanted to add to that, and we need to remember what's actually happening around officials in the way they do their work. And two that come to mind is that traffic wardens have now become traffic enforcement officers. So we've got the word force in there. And we've got the border force instead of customs and excise or whoever was looking after our borders. We're now into border force. And if you see one of their vehicles, that's what it says on the side. This is deliberate intimidation.
But speaking of following the rules, David, Nicola Sturgeon, very keen to make sure that people follow the rules.
Absolutely. She's tweeting here a reminder that you should not be flocking to beauty and tourist spots, or travelling more than 5 miles from your home for leisure and recreation. Doing so puts yourself and others at risk, which doesn't say how, and increases the chance of restrictions having to be reapplied. That is a threat of collective punishment. That's unlawful.
Absolutely. Now, let's move on to another subject. Back in April, the Metro published this. Top lawyer says trials should be held without juries during the pandemic. This gentleman, Sir Richard Enriques, if that's how you pronounce his name. Yeah. He's now a retired judge, but just to give a little bit of background, of course, he led the prosecution in the James Bulger murder trial. He also prosecuted the serial killer, Dr. Harold Shipman. He then became a Crown Court recorder. He became a High Court judge, ended up in the Queen's Bench Division and retired in November 2013. But probably his most notoriety comes from running the investigation into the conduct of the Metropolitan Police over this historical sexual abuse allegations against persons of public importance. There was plenty to criticise in the result of that. But nonetheless, he's been pushing for quite some time, the last few weeks, to remove juries from the system. And he was doing so again on this morning's Radio 4 Today programme, because he's extremely concerned that there is a massive backlog in criminal cases in the UK. Now, he admits that this backlog has been building for quite some time, but he's saying that under the lockdown, the backlog is growing by 1,000 cases per week. And he believes that there is no possibility of the court system ever catching up with this backlog of cases unless juries are removed from the system. So he says that judge-only cases are the only way to deal with the backlog of criminal cases. And in order to justify it, before I ask David for comment here, in order to justify it, he said, courts in Northern Ireland demonstrate that judge-only courts can work. So David, this man is using the diplock courts in Northern Ireland as justification for removal of juries. And of course, the motivation for doing that is that under the lockdown, cases just can't run, there isn't going to be time to catch up on the backlog.
Well, there we have it. The removal of all of our rights, of all of the protections that generations of gallant British people created, often costing their lives in doing so, will be surrendered because it's inconvenient. We have a scheduling problem, and we will just rubbish our ancient protection. I would point out that if it wasn't for juries, Alex Salmond would be in jail, almost certainly for a number of years, with a conviction for attempted rape, I would think. But the jury looked at that and thought, no, the case is nowhere near proven by the Crown. This is nonsense. If there had been a jury, Robert Greene would have never been in jail. Juries are our protection against an overbearing state. And frankly, I don't care how much inconvenience it costs. We need to keep them.
Absolutely. And the other point to make about juries, of course, is that they do have as you say, law has context, so does legislation. So juries do have the power to annul bad legislation. I would ask you, David, do you think that a judge would be prepared to annul bad legislation, or would he simply look at the letters on the page?
Who pays his salary? Do human beings respond to incentives? Yes, they do. Does the judge have a conflict of interest if his salary is paid by the state? Yes, he does. It's unreasonable to expect judges to do that. It is reasonable to expect volunteer jurors who value the traditions and know what it is to be British, have it understand it in ways that are ordinary and apparently mundane, but actually much deeper.
Absolutely.
And can we just add to that the UK column has still been unable to find out not who appoints judges, because they're appointed via the Judicial Appointments Commission, but who appoints the Judicial Appointments Commission. We're still unable to find this out. So if you follow it through, who is actually in control of judges, it becomes totally secret.
Absolutely. Okay, if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. And there are options for doing that there. Now, last week we were highlighting the fact that a lot of organisations are assisting with the government's contact tracing apps, feeding the data into J-Hub, which of course is the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence then stripping off any personally identifiable information and sending that on to NHSX for analysis. And this of course gives NHSX the opportunity to claim that all the necessary data protection legislation is being complied with. But our question was, what is J-Hub going to do with that information? Does that go somewhere else? Does it perhaps go to GCHQ for analysis, security services and so on? Well, maybe we get a clue from the United States, David, and this brings us into the US riots that are going on over there at the moment. Well, this article appeared from BGR. Minnesota is now using contact tracing to track protesters as demonstrations escalate. Now, this, of course, is as a result of the killing of George Floyd. And what this article is saying is that Minnesota officials said they're using contact tracing to better understand who the protesters are and where they're coming from. Contact tracing had previously been used as part of a comprehensive coronavirus response. According to Minnesota Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington, officials there have been using what they describe, without going into much detail, as contact tracing in order to build out a picture of protester affiliations. Now, a lot of people commenting on this on social media over the weekend and getting a bit bemused that the term contact tracing was being used in this context, because they're concerned that this is going to increase the amount of public concern and discussion over what happens to data as a result of contact tracing, and whether the contact tracing for the coronavirus situation is really softening us up for a much broader surveillance
application.
And we'll hear a bit more of that shortly. But David, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that first of all.
It's very striking. This is the Scottish model of government. This is fusion doctrine. This is joined up government to the ultimate degree. There are no functional departments or boundaries within government. It is all one joined up information sharing organism. So you provide it with information on your health, and they will use it to track you down if you attend a protest that turns violent. And you may well be asked very serious questions about your conduct that you wouldn't be asked if you hadn't shared your medical information. These are the problems we're having to face.
Absolutely. Well, I just wanted to bring this up as well, David, because obviously a lot going on in the United States with the riots and so on. But Vox here claiming that police have been targeting journalists covering the George Floyd protests. I would suggest that perhaps we've seen this type of thing going on in France as well with the Yellow Vests protests too, where journalists were being targeted by the French authorities. Now Vox here making the point that of course this has happened in the past, but they're saying they're highlighting a number of, I mean, most of this article is listing individual cases, individual injuries and so on. They're saying that across the country journalists have been targeted by police facing arrest, detention and violence, including pepper sprayed, shot by rubber bullets, targeted by police in the Ferguson protests in 2015 and during the civil rights era. So perhaps not something new, but nonetheless disturbing if it's true. I mean, what the main case they're highlighting is a journalist called Linda Tirado, who's apparently a photojournalist, who's apparently lost an eye as a result of being hit in the face with a plastic bullet. You know, it's a bit ironic that Britain and the United States, well, Britain and Canada were leading it, but the United States was certainly part of it, were highlighting the risks to journalists by public authorities in various tin pot dictatorships around the world. Surely the United States should be setting the example here, or maybe they are.
Well, they're not a tin pot dictatorship, but there may be a shiny aluminium dictatorship, and perhaps we are too. We've obviously old enough, Mike, you and I, to remember the bad old days in Ulster when there was a lot of controversy how you use baton rounds, and it was quite clear if they're not aimed low, they can be fatal. So this poor journalist who lost an eye, that's tremendously concerning. It could have been her life. I did see videos of what appeared to be the police in America in one city doing drive-by baton rounds, driving the squad car down the street and firing baton rounds out the window. And there's been huge and really concerning scenes of feral pack attacks by the rioters as well. So there's plenty of blame to go around. But there is certainly some of the conduct by what should be a disciplined force seems to be anything but disciplined, and not considering the likely consequences of their actions.
Absolutely. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's fine.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, staying in the US, but moving on. This is courts. Personal income in the United States shot up a record 10.5% in April. And many people wondering how this could be. So they produced a graph. This is from the United States equivalent of the Office for National Statistics, showing US personal income has shot up there. And so the question is why? Well, it was mainly due to government payments, of course, helping Americans cope with the COVID-19 situation. Government benefits as a percentage of personal income increased from what's that, about 15% up to around 30% as a result. So this is unemployment, aside from the government money, there's also unemployment insurance payments rising by 500% to $430 billion in April. So as a result of all this, individually, people have been doing very well, but that isn't going to last.
This is incredible. Up. I mean, they're not even keeping it steady. Up. The idea seems to be now that we can live just by printing bits of green paper, and as long as the presses keep rolling, everything will be fine. The real economy no longer matters. This will end horribly, because eventually the green paper will still come. It just won't buy anything. There's only one way this ends, and it's devaluing the currency.
And we've seen it before. But Sweden seems to still have a real economy, David.
Sweden does. all of the wise economists, or most of them, predicted with great confidence that Sweden would be into recession the same as the rest of Europe. But actually, it's not. The first quarter of the year, the Swedish economy, despite COVID-19, actually grew at an annualized 0.4%. So not a lot of growth, but it is growth against the background of sharp recession in Britain, France, Germany, the rest of Europe, United States. So the Swedish decision not to wreck their own economy is certainly achieving one of its aims, which is not to wreck their own economy.
Indeed. Let's come back to the UK then, and the Telegraph here. Now, the reason we're putting this up is because Sajid Javid was writing for the Telegraph. Sajid Javid, of course, the Home Secretary. We must expose the hidden horror of child abuse under lockdown. And he's saying that the economic impact of lockdown is going to really pale in comparison to the perfect storm, leaving vulnerable children isolating alongside their abusers. And he said, when you read the word paedophile, chances are that the abuser you imagine is the lone pervert acting in isolation. The distressing truth, however, is that stranger danger isn't the most prevalent threat. He doesn't at any point hint that the most prevalent threat might be VIP MP danger rather than stranger danger. No, that he's trying to spread this out across the country and arguing that most of the problem is as a result of lockdown and individuals being locked up with family members.
Yeah, and we just emphasise again that Thames Valley Police in particular have been extremely concerned. They are reporting around about a 500% increase in abuse of children since lockdown. But what they've been saying is that every way they turn, however they try to get attention to deal with this, there has been a stunning silence, including, of course, from the government. Now, all of a sudden, we've got this amazing turnaround, and I'm going to say, I wonder whether we're going to see this is going to be twisted into we need more social workers in schools, which has been policy going on in the background, and that would give us a nice little sort of English model of the named person scheme, which you have done such good work on up in Scotland, David.
It's also striking that he's very vague about what the mechanisms are here. He's saying, well, the lockdown is causing more harm to children. And that's true, it is. And I'm glad he's saying that. But he then seems to stop because exactly what came out of the Thames Valley Police was very interesting. How? What's the mechanism? Well, one of the mechanisms is everything is moved online and the grooming and the abuse is online. So vulnerable children have been picked up by a huge spike in online grooming. I don't think he said that. They didn't actually bring that one forward. And the other thing is the most vulnerable of all are children in care situations, because the child trafficking networks and grooming networks have penetrated the care system and the children are being trafficked out of the care homes. Now, this has been going on, but now when their links to family members and friends have been severed by COVID-19, they're all the more vulnerable. So there's a huge spike in care home trafficking for children that are in the worst of possible situation in terms of adult care anyway. And he's not mentioning that explicitly. So it needs to be more accurate. It needs to be more detailed.
Well, we'll find out whether it will be, because he is now going to lead what he's describing as a no-holds-barred investigation into child abuse in Britain, alongside the Centre for Social Justice think tank. And he said that this inquiry will not be impeded by cultural and political sensitivities. So what it looks like is that we're heading towards trying to divert attention away from the things that you've just spoken about, David, care homes and so on, and institutional problems, back into the homes. And as I say, he's attempting to say that stranger danger isn't the most prevalent threat. He's implying that this is going to be a problem with families, and perhaps there's going to be, as Brian suggests, going to need to be much more intervention at a family level. And let's not worry too much about what's going on in care homes or through care homes.
Yeah.
So where does that take us?
Well, just a switch of subject, but a lot of people still wearing masks, and it was pointed out to us a couple of days ago that on the London Underground, it's the thing to be wearing masks. This was an article back on the 12th of May, I think, yeah, from the Evening Standard. Government urging people in England to use face coverings in confined areas such as public transport. And Transport for London had said that face masks should be worn on all London Underground and bus services in the capital to curb the spread of COVID-19. The question is, though, are the masks themselves safe? Well, we got exploring. We decided to go straight to Transport for London. So we sent them an email saying that we understood that Transport for London had made the wearing of masks by passengers on underground trains compulsory. But many medical experts are warning and have been warning for some time about the dangers of masks. And this is really that you're breathing in your own stale air. So you've got limited oxygen and you're also breathing in CO2. Well, what was the response? We asked for the medical risk assessment. What risk assessment had been done to say that it was safe for people to wear masks, particularly when it's hot on the underground? You're in some pretty unpleasant air anyway. To be wearing a mask is something else. Well, the reply to date has been silence. We've sent a chase-up email, but no reply as to where their medical risk assessment was. But the two things that medical experts who've been advising UK column had highlighted: the dangers of hypoxia, where you're restricting oxygen, and hypocapnia, where you're taking in your own CO2. But the result of both these things happening is suppression of your immune system. So if you're a carrier of COVID, albeit with no symptoms, you're going to be in a worse state. Or if you're elderly or you've got some sort of bronchial condition, you're going to be in a worse state. So just to push this home, here's the British Medical Journal carrying an article which is saying that wearing a mask makes exhaled air go into the eyes. This can make you want to touch your eyes, and if you've got contamination on your hands, you're going to be reinfecting yourself. And here, face masks making breathing more difficult. For people with COPD, face masks are in fact intolerable. Moreover, a fraction of carbon dioxide previously exhaled is inhaled at each respiratory cycle. And it goes on to say this may also worsen the clinical condition of infected people if the enhanced breathing pushes the viral load down into their lungs. This is because you're not clearing the body of the virus, it's staying inside the face mask. And another one here, and this one is a bit more blunt, it said it would be a paradox if masks and respirators worked, given what we know about viral respiratory diseases. The main transmission path is long residence time aerosol particles, which are too fine to be blocked. So no messing around there. The masks present a definite risk to the wearer, and they can't protect against the viruses anyway.
David, that leads into the question of deaths. And well, BBC Future, not a section of the BBC that I was aware of terribly, but they're saying why most COVID-19 deaths won't be from the virus. Could it be that the BBC is agreeing with us?
Well, this was the kind of striking conclusion that I came to, and well, kind of. So they say here, well, from a famine of inverted commas biblical proportions to a deluge of undiagnosed cancers, whilst we're all worrying about coronavirus, most fatalities could be collateral damage. So in that regard, they are actually agreeing with the UK column. However, they go on to say things like they're talking about schools being shut. They say there can be small things actually that have a big impact. For example, if you insist that international truck drivers have to go into quarantine, your supply chain breaks down. So in South Africa, we've been persuading governments to issue letters to certain contracted transporters guaranteeing their drivers' rights of passage. This is a little example of where they go with this. Their concerns are, well, it might mean there's not enough vaccines. We might not be giving enough vaccine to infants, so we're going to have disease. There might not be enough government control of various things, so we're going to have supply breakdown because of lack of government control, or too much government control, but lack of intelligent government control because of the panic over coronavirus. So they're seeing some of the problems, but all of the solutions that they're seeing are big government solutions. They can't seem to see past that. They can't seem to see how a society that is free would function in a whole lot of ways that you can't do if you're trying to centrally control it. So they seem a bit restricted, but they are seeing at least some of the problems, that coronavirus is going to kill a few people, and that the state response to coronavirus is going to kill many more. They are starting to acknowledge this fact.
Okay, so who is BBC Future then?
I was wondering that. They are an award-winning science site, BBC Future, because I thought what BBC Future, what is this? Are they into tarot card reading, or are we into prophecy? I didn't know. It transpires they're committed to bringing you evidence-based analysis and myth-busting stories. Isn't that a strange phrase? Myth-busting stories around the new coronavirus. You can read more of our COVID-19 coverage here. So it seems to be a part of the BBC inspired, built by the coronavirus. I mean, it may be that coronavirus now has its own broadcasting. We knew it can hire vans, but it now may have its own broadcasting capability. They say we believe in truth, facts, and science. We take time to think, and we don't accept, we ask why. So it's a very good idea. And they say that what links them all is our approach to evidence-based analysis. Now, evidence-based analysis means you don't have any theory, you just follow a certain line of testing. And because you can't know what to test because the world is too complicated, the decision on what to test drives you down a certain line. You're not basing that on any expressed theory. It's a secret underlying theory. So evidence-based is a questionable issue. As well as that, though, they're going to have original thinking and powerful storytelling. So there we go. That's what they're about.
Stories, telling stories.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's tell a story then. This is from highlighted by the Strategic Culture Foundation, which one of those organisations that definitely gets a hit from the usual proper not crowd as being some kind of Russian disinformation outlet. But anyway, people can make up their own minds on this. But this article says German official leaks report denouncing corona as a global false alarm.
Yes, and they go on. They summarise the report, which is 93 pages long and in German, and I'm not Alex Thompson, so therefore I'm toiling a little bit. But they summarise it in English. They say the dangerousness of COVID-19 was overestimated. Probably at no point did the danger posed by the new virus go beyond the normal level. The people who die from corona are essentially those who would statistically die this year because they've reached the end of their lives and their weakened bodies can no longer cope with any random everyday stress, including the approximately 150 viruses currently in circulation. Worldwide, within a quarter of a year, there's been no more than 250,000 deaths from COVID-19 compared to 1.5 million during the influenza wave in 1718. The danger is obviously no greater than for many other viruses, and there is evidence that this was no more than a false alarm. Our approach could go along these lines. During the corona crisis, the state has proved itself as one of the biggest producers of fake news. And I was looking at the report in German, and just a preliminary remark at the start of the report reads as follows: the task and goal of crisis teams and any crisis management is to make the crisis special, recognize the dangers and fight them until the normal state is reached again. So a normal state cannot be a crisis. So this report is arguing that what we see here is a normal state of winter flu, and it cannot be a crisis, and it's been treated in an abnormal and inappropriate way. There's been very little reporting on this leaked report, and the press release from the scientists who wrote it, apart from RT German channel, they've reported it a little bit. The scientists are asking the politicians, don't ignore the expertise. This relates to the point you started on, Mike, with the SAGE minutes, where it seems that we in Britain also ignored the expertise and the political decision was made on something else. The press release in detail says therapeutic and preventative measures should never bring more harm than the illness itself. And it goes on for pleading that this be taken seriously. And that's the core issue. Has the response to coronavirus caused more harm than the illness itself?
I think the answer to that is yes.
I'm pretty sure the answer to that is yes. A little bit of a recap as to what's going on and what we think is going on with coronavirus. On Friday, this excellent slide appeared on UK Column News, the conga line of 100 people during the UK COVID pandemic. And what's it really showing? That the risk of dying from COVID-19 very, very small, just the little bit of red circle there amongst the 100 people. And I think we're looking at a statistic, please correct me if I'm wrong here, Mike, but we're looking at 0.26% from those that have got the virus and are suffering from the symptoms. So what is going on? Well, Friday's UK Column News raised a lot of very interesting things. We've got the chaos over lockdown, but nobody understands what lockdown is. The virus is apparently not prevalent in supermarkets, but if you try and get your hair cut, it's going to be popping into the barbers as quickly as that. So confusion there, but what has the government been driving? Skewed statistics, which are simply not giving us the true picture because the virus has been declining for weeks, and yet we're bottom right still in level 4, which is a heavy lockdown according to the government, with no sign of that shifting, although we are allowed out to play provided we stay 2 meters apart. And of course the news correctly showed that a number of experts are saying, what on earth is going on? This can't be for real. And there was a little bit of black humour saying as well that this might be the Dunning-Kruger effect, and basically the government doesn't quite know what it's up to. It's incompetent. Well, that may be the case, but that's the background. Is it incompetence and cock up? Well, some would say so. We don't think so, because the government is clearly manipulating these statistics. We know it's doing that to heighten the fear factor, because that's what the behavioural insights input into the SAGE team was doing, and the government wants to extend lockdown, but why? So we thought we'd just take a look at the COVID-19 smokescreen and what's behind it and see where we get to. So we can put the smokescreen on screen, as it were. So here it is with some of those graphs, because it's mainly the graphs that have been distorting the way people view the virus. Instead of following grandma's advice and getting out in the sunshine and fresh air to get rid of the virus, we should stay locked up indoors, particularly if you're an elderly person. So is it deliberate? Is it deliberate confusion? We think so. It's definitely not a cock up, because this is being orchestrated in government. Mike, you've brought in your J-Hub, so we know that what is going on at the back of COVID is the trace and track. We've also got the bubble syndrome, which we've talked about with this gentleman, Per Locke, who's been driving the move towards the bubble system. And of course, we've got the fusion doctrine, which you've spoken about a lot. And the other side of the coin is that we've got the repurposing of government with Cummings in the background there, who's one of the main driving forces. Now, I think we can put a line down between these two. They're working together, but to the left, we've got a Stasi state. This is the surveillance system, which is being locked together at amazing speed, but we can see that. But to the right, this is the repurposing of government. Democracy is being dismantled, and we are being prepared for the fourth industrial revolution, which means you won't have a job. Left, just add in there, malicious applied psychology. We know that is happening because that's being driven through the behavioural insights team. But the left-hand side is at least visible. We can see what's going on. We can read their papers. But on the right-hand side, this is completely hidden. So COVID is being used for a massive change in society. They're calling it repurposing government. We're actually watching a dictatorship. David, we're tight for time, but just to give you an opportunity to comment on that. And then I've got a really amazing article from the Telegraph, of all places, which I'll just mention a couple of things from.
Well, it's very interesting you raise the difference between what's seen and what's hidden. This is how many deceptions are perpetrated, including ones regarding law and statute and legislation. That we use smoke to obscure what's happening, and we have a mirror, so what seems to be real is in fact merely a reflection of something else. More on that perhaps in extra time.
Indeed. We'll just bring you to a Telegraph article, which should come up on screen. Where are we? There we are. So Janet Daly from the Telegraph: we appear to be blindly accepting an insidious denial of our liberties. The obsession with the Dominic Cummings saga has deflected attention from more serious issues. This lady in general, spot on. She said that what Cummings showed was that while people were quietly, or apparently quietly, sat in the background happy to be locked down, when they realised that he was flaunting the rules, they actually started to show their real anger, and there was a lot of letters and emails sent to MPs saying what on earth is going on. So let me just take you in a little bit of what she says here. She says that basically people were bullied into silence, and that it was conditions within communities which meant that people who actually said we don't like what's going on didn't say anything. And that's interesting, Mike, isn't it? Because that was detailed specifically in the applied psychological advice to SAGE, where they were planning to turn one section of the community against the others in order to keep people quiet. So that appears in this article, but it gets here because she says serious debate has been drowned out. So let's have the proper argument, shall we? We can start by asking the right question, which is to say the ones that journalists at the Downing Street briefing did not bother to ask at last week's launch of the test and trace system that is now proposed as the only way out of the lockdown. So criticism by a journalist of other journalists that they're not asking the key questions. And she says this: should a free society tolerate the introduction of a witch finder surveillance system in which anyone who happens to test positive for a virus is permitted to trigger the incarceration of any other person for 14 days, possibly in solitary confinement, if he or she is a member of is the sole member of the household? So this is a pretty hard-hitting article, and it basically says that it's just leaving people to tell on each other in a surveillance system, and this is taking away our democracy. She's summing it up.
Yes, that was excellent. That was really good. I'm glad you covered that. I saw that as well over the weekend, and I'm glad you covered that. And it's good to see that there is some heart left in the mainstream press in at least one or two odd corners.
And David, what we should say is for our viewers and listeners that Janet Daly is seeing the right things. She should now get emails of support and encouragement, and she should get further evidence to support the concerns that she's got. So she may be working for the Telegraph, but she should be supported with what she's actually written so far.
We're over time. Will we do one more?
One more.
Okay, we'll do one more.
We've been well behaved.
Yeah.
I think we can do one more.
Okay, well, it's maybe one that people don't want to hear about, but here we go anyway. The Brexit negotiations resume tomorrow. Of course, they've been very silent about this because of COVID-19, but UK and EU wanting to pursue this agreement over a future relationship. That's the second part of the Brexit process. Well, the question is, are they making any progress on this? Well, of course, this is the timetable for it, and so by July, Britain has to agree or not to an extension of the transition period. If we don't have an extension of the transition period, Britain will apparently leave on the December the 31st without a deal. So we're right back into this scenario again. But we've got to remember what it was that the EU is wanting to create here. First of all, a level playing field, of course. Well, are we going to end up with that? We'll see in a second. But of course, a very large part of this is the security partnership, which Britain still refuses to discuss, as we can see here, because these are the negotiating groups: trade in goods, trade in services, level playing field, as we've said, transport, energy, civil nuclear cooperation, fisheries, mobility, law enforcement, thematic cooperation, and participation in UNO programs. Those are the main negotiating groups that they're covering. Horizontal arrangements and governance, we have to forget that as well. I wasn't quite sure whether that was something to do with Ursula von der Leyen and activities involving her. I wasn't sure about that. But anyway, this was the key point. The European Commission notes that the United Kingdom proposes not to include a negotiating group dedicated to cooperation on foreign security and defence, foreign policy, security and defence, despite the fact that that was 50% of the future relationship agreement, potentially. So we don't want to talk about that. The question is, do we want a level playing field, or is it that even what's on offer? Well, apparently not, because here's David Frost, who is the UK chief negotiator on this, saying the major obstacle in the negotiations at the moment is represented by unbalanced proposals that would see the UK still bind to EU law or standards after Brexit, which is unprecedented in free trade agreements. So that's the British position. It seems to be have shifted somewhat from the middle of last year. Very concerned that there's not a level playing field being offered here, but we still don't want to mention defence and security publicly. But in the meantime, then, the House of Lords EU Select Committee has produced a report. And really, what's it about? Well, they're saying the combination of uncertainty, lack of momentum, and lack of time compounded by the shock of the COVID-19 pandemic is a potential threat to the economic prosperity and political stability in Northern Ireland. I should have mentioned that the report is about effectively the backstop. Well, what is going on with the backstop? It's pretty unclear. They say the agreement of the revised protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland in October 2019 paved the way for the UK to leave on the 31st of January 2020, yet the months since then have been characterised by uncertainty. On one hand, the UK government has been unable to explain precisely or consistently what it agreed with the EU. On the other hand, the EU's insistence on the rules has left Northern Ireland businesses fearing that there will be no flexibility to apply the protocol proportionately. This has led to a diminution of trust between the two sides and the upshot that Northern Ireland has felt like a pawn in the game. Well, indeed, and I have to say that the general consensus amongst people that I'm talking to from back home is that they are expecting that the dirty deed is going to be done, David, and there will be a border down the Irish Sea. The backstop hasn't gone away. The backstop that everybody was arguing about through the whole of 2019 hasn't gone away. It looks like there's no proper statement from the British government about what the actual arrangement is going to be. The House of Lords EU Select Committee highlighting that here. But the question is, how does this all fit in with the overall negotiations, which seem to be collapsing in a heap of, well, whatever.
It's very interesting and not at all clear. The backstop, I'm sure you're absolutely right about the backstop and the border down the Irish Sea. I would hope we would have a bridge across that. No sign of that moving forward yet. The lack of any obvious discussion on defence reminds me of the film In the Loop, where the discussion of the War Committee was hidden under the blandest possible title, so they called it the Future Planning Committee. So we've got participation in community programs, that is part of it's in there. Security, a reference to security, that's as part of it in there, and a reference to governance, there's part of it in there. So they are discussing these things. It is concerning that the British government were the ones who wanted to make this so obscure.
Absolutely.
Well, dirty deeds are done in the dark, aren't they? So that's the simple answer to that one, I think.
We'll leave it there.
I think so. We'll say thank you very much for our viewers and listeners for joining us. Thank you to everybody that's donated or taken out subscriptions. It's really wonderful to get that support. Thank you also to the people that have written letters of support to us. We had a letter from Australia today thanking us for what we do, plus also helping with AV11. That was very much appreciated. We'll leave it there. Don't sit at home worrying. Speak out. share the information, and of course challenge the government over its disastrous COVID-19 lockdown. We'll be back on
Wednesday.
Wednesday. Thank
Yes.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.